Welcome back to the Jeggett podcast. As you've likely realised, I'd like to spend some time talking about nationalism. According to the British Unionist Press, as a campaigner for Scottish independence, I'm a nationalist. But it might come as a wee bit of a surprise to some of my listeners, especially those in the independence movement, that I don't consider myself a nationalist. In fact, I'm not a fan of nationalism. As far as ideas go, I think nationalism's a pretty bad idea. The Scottish National Party, has worked hard to distance itself from the nationalist label, and there was a massive effort on the part of Yes Scotland during the last independence referendum campaign to articulate the independence campaign as an expression of civic nationalism as opposed to ius soli or blood and soil nationalism. So in fairness, this comes closer to the Scotland envisioned by the vast majority of the movement, the idea that Scotland, the nation, is the heritage of all who contribute to the nation and call Scotland their home, Scots by birth and Scots by choice. Admittedly, this civic nationalism appeals to me, and when push comes to shove, if I am to be called a nationalist, then this is my nationalism. But I'm not a nationalist. Even at the heart of this civic or acceptable nationalism, we have the centrality, the foundation of the nation, and everything that means. Regardless of how hard we try to redefine our nationalism, nationalism is inseparable from the construct of the nation, a territory and human environment distinct from every other territory and human environment, unified by a set of shared identifiers, a common language, a shared history and culture, and a similar ethnic and racial makeup, and a like religious experience. Sure, more can be added to this list. But however long the checklist, nationhood doesn't necessarily require that every box is ticked. Our sense of national belonging, everyone's sense of national belonging, will always be a combination of some of these items. It's very difficult to be Han Chinese when you live in Glasgow, speak English and have two French-Canadian parents. The nation and nationalism have to peg themselves on something we don't always get to choose. I can't just say I'm Brazilian, sitting here in Dublin without a word of Portuguese. We can't just self-identify when it comes to national belonging. I mean, it's not like gender. There's something inescapably essential about being Scottish, Welsh or Vietnamese. Other than those who migrate and adopt the national identity of their new home, most of us have no real freedom in the matter. We are of our nation, its culture, history, language and experience by the accident of birth. Even for those who couldn't care less about their national identity, it's imposed on them by their parents, their community, their nation, and by everyone they will ever meet, no matter where in the world they wander. Certainly this is how I've lived my Scottishness. I came to Ireland in the 1990s, an economic migrant. I've always been fiercely proud of Scotland and my national and cultural heritage. But as part of Ireland's famine diaspora in Scotland, I'm Irish too. Dublin's my home. Sure, Dublin's my city, mine, like I own it. I've lived in Dublin longer than I lived in my native Kilmarnock. I know its streets and its characters like the back of my hand. I have to ask directions when I'm in Glasgow. I give directions in Dublin. Asked if I'll ever go back to Scotland, my answer is always the same. Only when it's independent. Yet it doesn't matter how Irish I am. I'll forever at best only be an insider-outsider. Everyone here sees me as a Scotsman. Back in Scotland, folk think I'm Irish because of my accent. No one makes that mistake here in Ireland. My nationality is imposed on me too, and that tension will always exist. There's nothing we can do about it. But we can be proud of our national heritage without being any flavour of nationalist. Civic nationalism, as far as nationalisms go, is completely benign. But even this preserves the germ of particularism and exceptionalism, the bedrock on which ethno-nationalism and supremacism are built. Even in an ideal future independent civically nationalist Scotland, the propensity for it to develop into a toxic racially supremacist nationalism in times of crisis will always be there. And trust me, history's long. There will always be a crisis. The reason I'm so vocal about this otherwise fairly unimportant semantic difference between civic nationalism and a non-nationalistic campaign for independence is that right now nationalism is on the rise everywhere around us. And it's not the nice nationalism either. The horrible isolationist Brexit England's forcing on us is the product of a racist far-right English nationalism that has been bubbling under the surface of Englishness since the 1930s. Through the 70s and 80s it culminated in the National Front and the BNP with their openly neo-Nazi rhetoric, their violence and their hostility towards immigrants. Brexit is the latest development of the rights for whites nationalism instigated by the Liberal Democrats in their Homes for Locals campaign in central London. This only fueled the demand for the racist nationalist politics of the far right that spread through Labour's controls on immigration and the Tories' Go Home campaigns to the rest of the United Kingdom as a frightening new British ethno-nationalism. And the UK isn't special here. Donald Trump's success in the United States with his anti-foreigner, anti-Muslim, anti-Mexican, anti-immigrant jibber-jabber was only part of a Western trend moving everywhere from Putin's Russia to Marine Le Pen's Front National in France to the dangerous right. Nationalism was the hook that fears of an immigrant takeover hung themselves on during the refugee crisis, giving rise to the extreme nationalisms of Matteo Salvini in Italy, the Alternative for Deutschland, and the shocking fascism fast growing in Poland. And this isn't even mentioning the horror in the making that's Jobbik. We're over the horizon of living memory from the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and we're forgetting the lessons we learnt from our titanomachy struggle against National Socialism in Germany and Europe. YouTube is saturated with white nationalist videos on the quote-unquote holocaust. The early 20th century is the era of the acid reflux of the unfinished business of Nazi ideology. It has mutated into lots of newish, old ideas, identitarianism, new corporatism, and what have you, but it's obvious what's happening. All this shite about the ethno-state, the ancient state, European culture and Judeo-Christian values are masks worn by the swastika. Scotland's a wee country. We're sitting up here on the edge of the Atlantic facing out to the world, but these are dangerous times. We're surrounded by the rising tide of hateful, poisonous nationalism. This isn't a great time to be flirting with notions of nice nationalism. In the long run, I'd argue, there is no nice nationalism. As I've said, it's always going to carry those seeds of bitterness, and they'll never go away, waiting there dormant, waiting for the right time to germinate. Nationalism is a bad idea. It always has been. It's a dangerous idea. And we're kidding ourselves on if we think we're immune. In fact, thinking we're immune is in itself evidence of Scottish exceptionalism, that as Scots we are culturally protected from hatred and bigotry. We know we're not. There are other ways to seek and to be an independent state without embracing any kind of nationalism. This is where I'm with my fellow Spanish speaker Paul Kavanagh, the legend, the author of the Wee Ginger Dog website. Soy republicano y soy independentista. Creo en una Escocia libre. We can remain Scotland, Scots open to the world and welcoming to all who would come to our country and make it their home. We can maintain that ancient Gaelic welcome, Fáilte, without shackling ourselves to a tried and tested bad idea. This is why I am a socialist and a republican. Democracy works best in small states, and as a small northern European country, Scotland has so much to offer. We have an educated population steeped in the traditions of reason and democracy. We have more than enough resources to care for everyone and have plenty left over to spare. Scotland, as a republic, can be and should be a haven, a place where being Scottish means only that we have a shared humanity and a love and respect for difference, in a state where everyone is free to elect their government and contribute to the common weal. But this just isn't possible for Scotland in the sinkhole that is the United Kingdom, the extended Great Britain governed as it is by a neo-Thatcherite gaggle of one nation Little Britons, drunk on the stolen wealth of empire. In the UK, Scotland will never be free to be the country we so need it to be. That's not a statement of nationhood. That's merely a statement of social and economic fact. I don't need to glorify my or our Scottishness in order to defeat these social Darwinists. All we need to do is make the rational case for Scottish independence. This doesn't make us nationalists. What it makes us is independentistas. Viva la República!